On our second annual Education Day. I'm very, very excited and privileged and honored to welcome Dr. Susan Pollart to our Education Day. And the theme of our Education Day is mentoring and mentorship. And Dr. Pollart is an expert on this subject. She's currently a professor of medicine, family medicine at the UVA School of Medicine, and she will tell us a little more about herself in a minute.
Thank you so much.
Welcome. Welcome.
All right, let's make sure this is off so there's no feedback. Okay, I think it's off. Great. Well, thank you so much for inviting me here today. First, I want to thank Dr. Yaffe, who has stewarded me through getting everything submitted. Dr. Parker, who I met virtually through ELAM, and that's where a lot of my mentoring experience has grown over the last several years. And Katie Horton, who has really been the person getting me back and forth. When I arrived last night, it was quite late, and I sent an email about a little glitch at the hotel, and she emailed back at 4 in the morning. And I was like, I feel so well cared for. So thank you all for having me here in this lovely space and to talk about this topic, which is very important to me. Before we start, I'm going to say I have no commercial entities or conflicts, and I want to recognize the collaboration of two of my colleagues. Troy Buer is a director of faculty development at our institution and has really partnered with me and Dr. Mary Ellen Gussick, who's now Senior Associate Dean for Education at Temple. We started on this journey really together 6 or 7 years ago with the initiation of a junior faculty development program that Mary Ellen and another colleague, Lou Ann Thorndike, had started at Penn State many years ago. And so we modeled our program, our JFDP, after that. Several of the programs in the country have done the same. And we've moved on from the JFDP, which is not necessarily a mentoring program, but has a mentoring component that I'll tell you about, to many other things. As we start, I want to plant a thought in your brain for you to reflect on a little bit. And that's about the mentoring you've experienced and the mentoring you've provided. And I want you to think very, very broadly about mentoring. All the ways you've helped somebody advance personally or professionally. What are all the things you've done? And I've got a little bit of a mentoring thing that I'll talk about when we get to functional mentoring, but there are many, many ways we engage with people who serve in a mentoring role, provide knowledge and skills that help us advance in many aspects of our life. So take a second to pause on this, think about who's been influential mentors and who you've mentored, and watch their career grow, because I think many of the things I'll then say about mentoring in this talk will resonate with you, and you can think of specific examples that hopefully encourage you to continue this really important work. All right, I don't want that. I want this. So objectives, put them up here. They're important. We're going to talk about characteristics and impact, talk about roles and types of mentoring. We're going to talk about the things that are important to build and sustain a developmental network. And then we're going to talk about characteristics of good mentors and good mentees, about mentorship challenge. And then sprinkled throughout, I'm going to give you some examples of what we've done at UVA. If you're a scholar of mentoring, you will recognize that the term mentor was actually a name of the wise friend that Odysseus asked to supervise, care for, help grow his son on the 20 years that Odysseus was traveling and journeying and fighting. And so the name mentor, who is Odysseus's friend here, became synonymous with the action of mentoring. And we particularly got involved in it around, as I said a number of years ago, around the needs of our faculty, and began looking at the literature. And this is one particular article we like that talks about all the aspects of mentoring. It talks about the format of mentoring, short-term, long-term. It talks about the impact of mentoring, and it talks about the roles of mentoring, but it's all about the relationship between the mentor and the mentee, or the mentors and the proteges or mentees. It's a relational piece, and that's what's the really important piece to keep in mind here. And mentoring is not just a relationship between two people or between a group of mentors and mentees. It's part of the organizational culture. And that's why it's so wonderful that you are doing this as some of your work around this academy today, is thinking about mentorship within the context of your larger institution, but it also will be thinking about it in the context of your department. So one of your colleagues from family medicine, Rich, came up and spoke to me just beforehand and told me a little story about how my founding chair of family medicine at UVA mentored him when he was thinking of writing a book around his years in practice. That was a very focused mentorship that was about a relationship and also a lot about the culture of family medicine, because we tell stories not just about clinical disease, but about the relationships that we form over those very, very long years we have in connections with patients. And that's a perfect example of a culture of a specialty and a relationship. And you will see all of those things in the very varied ways mentoring shows up at this institution. They may not be identical department to department. Neurosurgery may look different from neurology, which may look different from neuroscience, but they're all about this relationship between mentors and mentees. So what really started us on our longer journey about creating an early career faculty mentoring program and a program for every department? Well, it was these results from our last Standpoint survey, which was done in 2018. We're in the midst of a new Standpoint survey. If you're not familiar with Standpoint, it's the AAMC's faculty engagement survey. There are many components. We use it for the faculty portion. We have great response rate. The last time we did it, 79% of our faculty responded. So we felt that we got good information from our faculty. And the mentoring piece, we really paid attention to these two questions. And so you can see the lighter bar are the responses of junior faculty. So those are assistant professors. The darker bars are senior faculty, so associate and full professors. And these are agreement with the statements, having a formal mentor at my medical school is important to me. So 79% of our junior faculty agree or strongly agreed that having a formal mentor was important. 52% of our more senior faculty, our associates and full professor, agreed or strongly agreed that having a formal mentor at my school is important to them. But then there was this gap, because the other question was, I receive formal mentoring through my department or the medical school, so internal mentoring. They have a mentoring relationship in our school. And you can see for our junior faculty, there was a 27% gap between those who said it was important and those who said they had it. And for our senior faculty, you can see 52% said it was important, only 27% said they received it, so a 25% gap. So we knew we needed to think about this and think about how we better met the needs of our faculty for mentoring. And that started down this journey, which as any good journey in academic goes, we dove into the literature around mentoring and began work on several programs. And the underpinning of everything we did was this understanding that a positive mentoring experience is derived from two things. First, you're receiving mentoring, and we could see that folks wanted it and weren't getting it. But then that the amount and quality of mentorship itself is perceived as satisfactory. Doesn't have to be extraordinary, but it's perceived as satisfactory. And all of those things lead to a positive mentoring experience. And it's not just a positive experience for the mentees. These are all the benefits to the mentees, but also the mentors and to the organization. As I've already mentioned, positive mentorship is really good for the organization. And you can see at the top of each of this is positive mentorship relationships. It increases faculty vitality for mentees, for mentors, and for the organization. And faculty vitality is designed by these authors and repeated in multiple places. Faculty vitality is the synergy between the levels of satisfaction, the levels of productivity, and the levels of engagement. And with high levels of vitality, it enables everyone, faculty, everyone in this group to maximize their professional success and achieve their goals. And we'll go back to that vitality piece later in the talk, but you can see vitality, productivity, satisfaction, engagement, all improved with good mentorship, and not just for the mentees. So what you can see is that there's when we start a mentoring program, there can also be questions about how do we pay for the mentor's time. Well, the mentors do. I mean, I'm not saying that you shouldn't protect it or in some way reward it, but there are inherent benefits to the mentors in a mentoring program. And I think that's important to observe if you're creating a mentoring program for yourself. So another thing that was really important to us was thinking about when does mentoring occur, what part of the faculty life cycle? Because as I said in our survey, junior, associate, and full professors were interested in mentoring relationships. And I love this particular publication because it talks about the career learning cycles and career transitions of faculty in general. And it describes these cycles that are 3 to 5 years in length, where somebody starts with exploration, and that's that little dash line that's kind of a flat in terms of performance. So performance is the y-axis, career age is the x-axis. You start with exploration, you try some new things, you establish yourself in that new area, you develop mastery, you're owning it, and then typically people enter into a new cycle of exploration, trial, establishment, mastery. Now, for how many of you does that ring true? How many times have you think you've gone through this cycle? At least twice, if not many times. Yeah, we've all done it. We get really good at something. We think, and what else? Who am I now? What do I do next? And that mentorship at those transitions where when you're going from that level of mastery to new exploration is a place where mentors become really important, even to those well-established in their field. And so we just love this. And this really was the basis for our early career mentoring program, because what we wanted to do with our early career program is really isolate that exploration stage. And for our program, it was people in their first year at our institution. So it wasn't necessarily their first year ever on faculty, but it was their first year at our institution when they were exploring and getting to know our institution. And we really focused that year on exploring UVA, but also exploring what it means to be in a mentoring relationship. What does that look like? So as we did that, we said, what are the things we're going to talk about in that year? What are the mentorship needs? And now for the next section, I'm going to talk about mentorship needs in general and types of mentoring. Well, here were all the things, again, as we looked at the literature and talked to our faculty, that were identified. Some of them are cultural, like navigating the institution and preparing for promotion and tenure. They're unique to our institution and our institutional culture. Some are content focused, like developing expertise and planning for career development. And then others are basically just making process decisions. So there's content, there's process, and there's culture. So the processes are balancing competing demands, navigating imposter syndrome, improving time management. But we really built our curriculum then around those 3 domains of content, process, and institutional negotiation. And to do this, then we talked about all the roles someone might have to fill if a mentor was going to help in those 3 domains. Obviously, they'd have to do a lot of things. I mean, as the content expertise, they'd have to be the career guide and the teacher and the skill developer. As the process support, they'd be the sponsor and the counselor and the an advisor. But there were also many ways in which they would be the cultural support during this period of transition. And so we really explored all these things that are part of mentorship or can be part of good mentorship. And we also talked about the ways that, at least in this program was a dyad, but all the ways you can get those needs met in different types of mentoring relationship. And so here's a description of multiple faculty mentoring models from a publication that looks at that and was published just in the last few years. And I'm going to spend a little time talking about each of those, with the point being that all those things on the past slide about how you get, about all these needs, how they're met, are not necessarily met in the typical traditional dyad relationship, but there are many, many other ways to get those needs met. Oh my goodness, we got to change that. Sorry, back to slideshow. All right, good. So let's talk about the traditional dyad first. So this is what, Odysseus asked Mentor to do for his son, be that dyad. And the dyad is great for passing along information when the mentor and mentee share a similar area of expertise. And it is what we think of for ages and ages of being what a mentoring relationship is about. And it is very effective in that manner when a good pairing can be made. But it's also what's the traditional model. And if you think about traditional, that harkens back to a time when our faculty workforce was much less diverse, was very different from it is now. And so when you think about the traditional model, it's the arm around the shoulder of an older white male to a younger white male, and involves all aspects of faculty life, including the personal life, which is typical, again, in those days, what was typically talked about. I'm not saying it's the reality, but was talked about, white male mentor, a white male mentee who has a partner at home, usually a wife caring for the family, not working outside the home. Really different from the society we find ourselves in today, which I think we've made great advances in that realm. However, that mentoring that was that very traditional dyad can't necessarily speak to all the things that a mentee in today's culture may need. The good things about this relationship is how well the mentor and mentee knew each other, how connected they were over the life cycle. Typically, over the course of that relationship, the mentor moved from just being a mentor and providing advice to being a sponsor who really reached out and supported that mentee, because they were a powerful, influential person, and gave them new opportunities and basically helped them step up that ladder. The problem with that model today is because of the challenges that people often find in mentoring across difference. We have few of these mentor-mentee dyads, and so we may lose the opportunity to sponsor those who are typically underrepresented in medicine. And this has been written about in the literature, how women may have fewer sponsorship, particularly women of color may have less opportunities for sponsorship, how folks from groups underrepresented in general have less opportunities for sponsorship. So for all the benefits of that typical dyad, it's insufficient for the world of academic medicine we find ourselves in today. But what is important to keep in mind is what sponsorship is about and how we can all be active as sponsors, even outside of mentor-mentee relationships. And it really is, as described by this particular group of women authors, a situation in which someone can see what a junior person is capable of. They provide resources, they provide the connections, they open doors, and they really, as quoted from this article, they catapult nascent talent from unknown to the rising star. It's who you know and how they get to know you and introduce you to other people. A really, really important role. And it is used to be inextricably, whatever that word is, tied to mentorship. And yet it's something we really need to be thinking about as a separate role we may all play when we're looking for that nascent talent and trying to help catapult them. And I would argue that this is something we could do in our daily life. It's really work around, going to a meeting where you typically are the person presenting data to folks higher in the organization. Bring your junior colleague and ask that colleague to present that information. In fact, tomorrow I was asked to speak to our Department of OBGYN at the retreat by their new chair on mentorship. Well, Troy is coming with me, and Troy is going to do most of the presenting because he and I are really tightly connected with this work. In fact, I would have sent him here, but Donna invited me, so I really felt I needed to come. But this is a way to get Troy, my junior colleague, who's an assistant professor, because he's doing this really important work. So, and that's a fairly big thing, asking somebody to present for you, but asking Troy to present at a meeting in my stead, even if I'm there, as a way to sponsor him. So thinking about who the folks who could do your work, who could step into the spotlight for you for smaller tasks and then larger tasks, is really the kind of sponsorship we need to know to have that inclusion that we really want when the mentoring dyad doesn't necessarily provide it in the same way. So that's about the dyad. Another kind of mentoring I want to talk about is functional mentoring. And this is a schematic of what happens in our junior faculty development program. And it comes from the Penn State's original description of the JFDP. And you can see that the course itself has a curriculum in professional development and their knowledge and skills and resources and things people learn. And they have a mentored project that's a thread throughout the program. And we very much, for that mentored project, ask them to have a functional mentor. So not your usual mentor, have an aspect of this project that you can't do within the mentorship relationships that you have. And we're going to help you, we're going to introduce you to someone in our organization who can help you with this. And just for this very focused period, help you with that project, and you get that experience with functional mentoring. So I was thinking about what are examples of this that we have every day. I'm sure you all have them every day. You haven't necessarily thought of them, but here's mine. So one of the things I love cookies. I love baking cookies. I love baking cakes. I like baking in general, but I always make rugelach at Christmas, at the December holidays, and I make them for several of my Jewish friends and give them as Hanukkah gifts. Um, but they're a pain, in my opinion, to make, particularly when you roll out the dough because it gets sticky and it sticks to the surface, blah, blah, blah. So America's Test Kitchen on their show on PBS last week had a segment on rugelach. People are nodding. Who else saw that? And it was like, wasn't it great? So it was a game changer because you make the dough, you put it, and then you roll it out, and then you freeze it for 30 minutes. And boom, you can roll those things up. They don't mess up the counter. And so my rugelach are made. They're in the freezer. I haven't baked them yet. But that's functional mentoring. It was that one little tip of rolling out that dough between plastic. I've got to find a substitute for the plastic. But rolling out that dough, freezing it for 30 minutes, it was a very focused piece of mentorship for me, but really a game changer. And so when you think about functional mentoring, it's all those things we do for just get one tip that, as I said, is a game changer for that faculty member. So I don't think we've talked about that much, and yet I think we do it all the time. And it's a way for a mentee to expand their network of people who they know, who are invested in their career, can help grow their career. Of course, it's flattering for the functional mentor to give someone a new skill and then see them take off with it. So we talked about the dyad. This is about functional mentoring. What else do we talk about? Then there's the peer and facilitated mentoring that can occur. So this is when a group of mentees connects either with each other, and that's often a learning community where people have different areas of expertise, or a group of mentees may coalesce around a single mentor. And as I said, Dr. Parker and I met through ELAM. ELAM has a wonderful system of peer mentoring. They have learning communities for 6 women are in learning. For those who don't know ELAM, it's a program on professional development of women, and it's about people who are in leadership roles and continuing to emerge as leaders. But 6 women with a facilitator, they meet once or twice a month over the course of the ELAM fellowship year, and they're mentors each other around the content of the curriculum, but about so many other things. And it really becomes, again, this network of people that would have not met otherwise, but become powerful mentors to each other. They're all in academic medicine. They aren't necessarily even in, I've had women, but they're not necessarily even in the same area. In fact, they usually are not. We have clinicians and basic scientists and folks in public health sciences who are all together, but the themes in academic medicine and the conversations about those are so important. And so in these particular, in the peer facilitated, the peers run it. In the mentor in the peer mentoring, the peers do it. In the facilitated, the mentor may be there to initiate it, but then break off, and the peers themselves have the ability to continue that relationship over time and may or may not do so. It's really about a developmental network as well, and it's a multiple mentoring thing. In that case, peer, but there are also other ways to have that network of mentoring. And in this particular figure, it's talking about a mentee having a whole spectrum of mentors that focus on different parts of their life. And as I mentioned, because we have changed so much in terms of the makeup of our faculty, it is often true that no longer can someone meet all their needs. And it's not just that we no longer have largely white men, it's also we have people who are clinician scientists, and this organization is a perfect example. There were no educator academies 20 years ago, and yet they've grown up all over the country. And we're in a very similar situation to yours, where we had an academy that was largely honorific, and we recognize now we want to play a developmental role. So rather than having, you all have now 2 organizations that are really tightly connected, we reformatted our whole organization. But it's just an example of the way medicine has changed. We just didn't focus on the science of education. And so in doing that mentee who now may have a mentor who's their content expertise in some area of biomedical sciences, also may have a mentor who's a content process expert in education, so that mentee can become an effective educator. And frankly, it's an important part of our academic advancement. And so this network of mentoring is probably much more common today, and really probably the target and the gold standard for where mentoring should be. And it really is this set of relationships that provides mentorship assistance. And it may be senior colleagues and it may be peers, but it also may be family members and maybe community members. In fact, I hope it is community members, because part of our mission is to reach out and support our surrounding communities, particularly those of us in public institutions. And so it is this network that is so much broader than the people in your department. The challenge is that it is work to create that mentoring network. Now, I know there's some program directors in here, and during residency, we also do a great job of developing that mentoring network for our residents. So in our department, we have a residency leadership group. It includes behavioral scientists. We've got people who are education experts. We've got the OB team leading. So we create that network and hopefully model it. And of course, there's lots of peer mentoring in the residency training program. But outside of that training, it's really often becomes the responsibility of the faculty member to put the thought and the effort and the attention into building and maintaining that network. And at those career transitions, when you're moving into a new area of exploration, the work then is to create that network of mentors duplicated with each of those transitions and really make sure needs are being met. And there are a couple of ways, actually, we've found a few tools that we use in our training to make sure when we're teaching people about good mentoring relationships, we're helping them understand how you analyze your network. So this is from a MEDED portal publication from 2017. And it's a worksheet we have filled out in our training program about the people who help you get your job done, so the content experts, people who advance your career, the culture and process, and the people who provide personal support. You can't read it very well, but you can have access to these. We ask them to map their network and then rate it in terms of diversity. You know, do you have all one kind of person, or do they meet your multiple needs? Redundancy, is one person doing everything, or do you have people who can do various aspects? Interconnectivity, in other words, does everybody in your network know each other, or have you created a boundary spanning network that is helpful for you, but it's also helpful for your mentors? Because if in the mentoring relationship you're helping your mentors meet other people that may be beneficial to them, then you've got the reciprocity. And then strength of connections, what are you going to do to keep it going, etc. Connection to power and influence, important for sponsorship. And then size, is it so big you can't maintain it, or is it of a size? But this is a great way to have people think through that the organization they've surrounded themselves with. We also use this schematic, which is for the National Center for Faculty Development and Diversity, that again asks people to fill in this huge network of all the people that are part of the mentorship, including those who provide emotional support, those who are their intellectual community, those who keep them accountable, you know, those who are helping them pay attention to accountability. So another tool that you can find on the internet, and you may want to, if you develop mentor programs, think about how your mentees could use this to think about how their needs are being met. And if they aren't, advice you can help them with in terms of how they build their network is to just connect with leaders, hear their stories, ask for advice, join key committees and work groups. I always tell junior faculty when they're thinking, or anybody, when they're thinking about joining a committee, join a committee that you know there's something you're going to get out of it. You're going to contribute, it's service, but what are you going to get out of? And by that, I mean, write your own learning objectives. The outcome I hope to achieve by joining this committee is meet this and this people. Or I've heard the committee chair is great at meeting design. I'd like to watch how that person runs the meetings and learn about meeting design. Or it may be, I think search committees are a great thing for a junior faculty member to be part of. They meet influential people in the organization. Ideally, if it's well run, you learn a lot about inclusive recruiting processes. You'll learn some HR things around best practices and posting ads and timelines. It's just nuts and bolts work, but you'll learn it really well when you're part of it. So joining key committees and work groups is a great way for people to expand their network and get outcomes associated with it. Outside of your institution, it's going to those national meetings, but not just that. It's finding who's doing the work that you're doing and is active on platforms like Twitter. Twitter is a great way to connect with people nationally. And I've had women that I've worked with through the AAMC's early career program talk about following people on Twitter that were interested in the areas where they had interests, following them, commenting, liking the posts they did, and then they'd go to a national meeting and they'd meet one-on-one. They'd never met in person, and yet they had a relationship, and that person is there as a mentor and sometimes as a sponsor. And I would say Donna and I never met in person. We knew each other through ELAM in a year I was teaching. Donna was a fellow, never met in person, and yet Donna reached out to me to ask me to come. Of course I'll come. You know, Donna's part of my network now, as are all of you. So I would say social media can be a really powerful way to build that network and get to know people. And again, for your national organization, joining committees, work groups, great ways to connect, get skills, learn things, learn process, you know, information and process, and to meet people. Always asking for support and advice and mentorship and sponsorship. All right, so I'm going to move on to talking about characteristics of effective mentors, what a mentee needs to do to be helpful, problems that can occur in relationships and how to address them, and then a little bit about our programs, and then should have a few minutes for questions or your comments or reflections, which would be great to hear. So what does an effective mentor do? So we've talked a lot about its knowledge, its skills, its process, its attitudes. So it's somebody who's in your field and is well connected, and is also generous is with their time. They're a good listener. You are compatible in some way. Again, these are all things described in the literature. Not too hard, I mean, all probably makes great common sense, but I think it's worth a conversation if someone's thinking of entering into a mentoring relationship. For the mentor, can I be all of these things? I mean, I may have every one of these that I can be, except I'm not accessible. I'm just too overbooked. And so even as much as I may want to do this, I know I don't have the accessibility right now to do this. And that may really disqualify some folks, but thinking about when you are a mentor, can I be these things? So that you don't end up in a conflictual situation, which we'll talk about a little bit more. Mentors also can serve not just as content experts, but in a coaching role. So if you think as a mentor as someone providing advice, a coach in a mentoring relationship helps people discover their own advice. So I think of it as terms of one person gives advice, one person helps or one role gives the advice, the other role helps people unearth the advice for themselves. And this is the GROW model is very common for coaching and mentoring. But what I'd say is the GROW model is something that many mentors may do without thinking about it. And yet it's useful to think about, what does that model really look like? What are the questions that you should be asking in a coaching role? And how do you separate for both the mentor and the mentee when I'm mentoring you, when I'm guiding you, when I'm giving you advice, not directive, I'm giving you advice and giving you opportunities. Your supervisor is who's your director, but I'm providing. And when am I not giving advice so much as helping you discover what you want to do next? Because the mentor may run into obstacles around advice is given then not taken. That may be the time to step back and say, okay, where do you want to go? What has to happen? And what are the ways to get it done? And then what are the obstacles that are in the place, but that are in the way that may make it hard for you to do those things? So I think it's just separating a little bit mentorship. We've talked about mentorship and sponsorship. Also separate out coaching and be aware as a mentor and a mentee when coaching is going on, less than mentoring. And when coaching may be needed and the mentor may not feel in a good role to do that, how you help a mentee find a coach to help them work through rough spots that may not be appropriate for the mentor, either because of their skill in that kind of work or because of their interest in doing that kind of work. So how about mentoring across difference? So we've already talked a little bit about how difference was not part of mentoring for, certainly when I was in training. You know, I was telling someone I've been at UVA 44 years. So I was the first woman MD on our faculty. I was a resident at a time where there was one woman resident every year. Completely changed in that time frame, and so has, you know, but what was the mentoring like for me? It was definitely mentoring across difference. I had no women who were mentoring me. I had no women who were mothers mentoring me. I had no women who were single mothers mentoring me, and yet I was all of those things. And so what are those differences, and how do you address them? Well, the first thing is you need to make it safe to talk, but not required to talk about it. So you need to acknowledge the differences. You may need to ask about the experience that a mentee may have. If you're the person who's the majority and the minority, and the mentee is someone from a group traditionally underrepresented, make it comfortable to talk about it, but not require it, knowing that people are going to be in different places around talking about those differences, but at least acknowledge that there is a difference here. At this point for me, there's difference with race ethnicity for me versus others. I have always been in a more privileged racial group. However, there's very little difference across gender for men and women, mostly because I find men earlier in their careers now are invested in their families in different ways, in ways that the men that were my colleagues who were all married to stay-at-home parents just had a whole different thing. So that difference is less there for gender for me now than it was when I was a mentee, but it still exists for other differences. And being able to say, here's some difference. How should we talk about it? Should we talk about it? But respect boundaries that folks have, but certainly not pretending it doesn't exist and not acknowledging that experiences are different. And there are many, many experiences beyond the ones we always talk about, beyond gender, race, ethnicity. There are all kinds of ways people have grown up differently. And that's why it's often nice to start a mentoring relationship with a conversation around, tell me about yourself. And let people open that door. And people will open that door in all different places, and they take different paths to get to the deepest parts of their past that influence who they are. But that openness to those conversations is so important. And yet allowing people to go where they want to go with the discussion and respecting boundaries people may have and what they're willing and feel is healthy for them to share with you. All right, so we talked about mentorship qualities. We talked about how mentors can also be coaches. We talked about mentors and mentoring across difference. Now let's talk a little bit about mentees. And remember, the mentee, while they're the junior person in the relationship, it really is their responsibility to drive the relationship. In other words, they access the mentor, they set up the meetings, they set the meeting times, they work with the mentor on the agenda, they're responsible for the deliverables. And so a mentee not willing to take on that responsibility is probably going to be quite dissatisfied for both the mentor and the mentee's time. So I think, again, these often are very obvious, but I think the one that is really important is for the mentees to understand that they are the driver of the relationship, that it's really not about the mentor parenting. It's about the mentor advising and helping. And if they see the mentor in a parental role, it's not going to be very successful. Successful relationships, though, do have some things in common: mutual respect, clear expectations, and we'll talk a little bit more about how you are clear of those. But reciprocity is also an important part of the two-way street. And we talked about the advantages for the mentor in a very early slide, but also think about where are the things that the mentee may have knowledge the mentor doesn't have, the reverse mentoring that can take place. When a mentee may have technological ability, may have facility with social media, many things where a mentee, if they recognize the mentor is less advanced in certain skills, may want to bring those into the relationship. Or as the mentee develops a network that may be outside of the organization, may meet folks that the mentor doesn't know, how does the mentee bring the mentor into those relationships? So it helps the mentor expand their relationship as well. So I think that reciprocity is something we don't focus that much on in terms of the mentor-mentee relationship, and it's important to talk about and consider, and for a mentee to be thinking about. So how do we make sure this mentor and mentee relationship really meets the goal of increasing vitality? Well, we do it by creating a mentoring agreement in a form, and our form is adapted somewhat from this article, but it has these important components around, what are the goals and objectives? How do we define success? And by that we mean, what are the metrics of success for this relationship? How do we set expectations around communication, decide relationship management? Are we going to meet in person? Are we going to Zoom? Are we going to send all email? And then confirm commitments. And by that, I mean, both members of the group sign and date the agreement. And so having this kind of thing in place, rather than, will you be a mentor? Sure. What are we going to do? Let's have coffee. End of discussion. Really being very articulate about these can contribute greatly to the success of the mentoring relationship. what are the things that don't contribute? What are the things that lead to a failed mentoring relationship? Well, at the bottom on lack of experience, knowledge, and skills, that can just be a matter of we thought we connected around an area, but it's pretty clear that either the mentor doesn't have the knowledge and skills the mentee expected, or the mentee isn't interested in the knowledge and skills that the mentor has, or isn't ready for those knowledge and skills. And all of these things can, to some degree, be helped by that mentoring communication. That mentoring agreement. If you talk about how you're going to communicate, if you talk about what the goals and objectives and the metrics are, those can all be spelled out. Some won't. Personality difference won't necessarily come out in the mentoring agreement. And even if you think you've spelled it out well, there can be challenging things that arise in a mentoring relationship. And so this is the way we've talked about this in our junior faculty development program. The greens are the things that are just misses. We can negotiate this. We can sit down and talk about what's our shared interest in this relationship and how do we deal with the fact that the meetings are frequently canceled or no-show. The simple conversation is, we signed a mentoring agreement. We both really are interested in having this occur. Something's getting in the way of us meeting. Let's sit down, compare calendars, see what it is, and see if we can reschedule those meetings or find a way. So simple no negotiation, low stakes, little emotion, just an agreement. This isn't working. Let's recalibrate. And we use the principles of getting to yes from the Harvard Negotiation Project for that particular, when we train around those conversations. But then there are conversations that move to higher stakes, more emotion, really potential for conflict. And those are the needs not being met, when emotions get involved, frustration, defensiveness, conflicting personalities. And that's where we use the principles of crucial conversations of saying, how do you frame a conversation around this? And it may be the mentor or the mentee that initiates, but you realize this is something we really have to take some time to step out of that relationship and talk about the conflict we feel, the emotions we feel, and how we resolve this. And you may decide from that conversation to move away from this relationship, but it's really important. And then we talk about those 3 red boxes and other red boxes like it, which is, we tell the mentee and the mentor, regardless of which one identifies it, these are not things for you to negotiate with each other. These are things to bring to me as a Senior Associate Dean for Faculty Affairs and Development, to employee relations, to HR in general, to your department chair, to the Senior Associate Dean for Research, all of those resources, but do not take these on, because this is a larger organizational piece and something we need to help you with. And so we framed it in this green, yellow, red way, and we think it's really helpful for people to understand there are different levels of conflict, and it is okay to say, I'm here, I'm here, I'm here, and it's okay to say what resources. And I'm pleased to say that when we finished with our program, we asked on our evaluation, if problems arise, in the mentor agreement form, if problems arise in your mentor relationship, what will you do? And they came up with the ideas that you communicate, talk about it early, discuss the problems, revisit the goals, get help when needed, either from a mentoring committee or leadership, and decide if they're going to continue the relationship, move on, or end the relationship, always with the understanding that sometimes you need others. And this was from our first mentoring program, which would have been in 2021, not long after we had it. This article came out about addressing mentorship challenges, which basically said the same thing: addressing them with transparency, early intervention, solution finding, and escalating to the point of get an outside force to help you if it's really something that you can't address. So I'm going to take a few minutes just to discuss some aspects of the 3 programs I've talked about: JFDP and early career in various ways through that. I haven't talked about the mentoring learning committee, but the early career, just to give you a little better sense of that, we piloted it in 2019, and then the next year we had to go full on virtual for the next group, which actually went pretty well, but still it was not the same as getting everybody together in that same room. It's 8 sessions, some with the mentor mentees together, some with them separate, but really had great participation. And this is an IRB approved protocol looking at these particular outcomes. And as you can see, level 4, that vitality piece is an important part, right? Vitality, retention, and advancement. So retention and advancement, we can follow pretty easily. How do we measure vitality? Remember, I said vitality is that synergy between high levels of satisfaction, productivity, and engagement that enables one to maximize their professional success and achieve goals in concert with institutional goals. And so we developed some questionnaires asking about satisfaction as a faculty member. And the point of this is for you just to see the research, not so much of the result, but this is how we're measuring vitality. What's your satisfaction? What's your productivity? And then we ask them about a scholarly project. Where is it now during the program, and then a year later? And what you can see is we had people move from planning to implementation pretty robustly over that year. And then we asked them specifically about their level of engagement, which is of course wonderful to see. Now you could say, is this because they only got involved in the program because they were quite engaged, but these bundled up together help us look at it. And then this is the other piece is over the past year, over the course of the program, have you expanded your network? And the truth is, I think this is one of the really great outcomes of any longitudinal program is people tend to expand their network, and those networks can be really helpful. And in this case, 11 of 12 mentees that they had expanded their network to help advance their career and help them get their job done, which is ideal because again, these are new people in our organization. And if they're building a network that helps them get their job done and advances their career as well as provide personal support, we're really happy about that. And then the final thing I want to talk about is the culmination of all this was a recognition that our program was a one-year program, and our goal was to do this early career program and then to send the faculty back to their departments for the mentoring program in the department. Now the question is, was there a good faculty mentoring program in their department? And there probably wasn't for most of the departments. And so every year our dean does department annual reviews with each department chair and their leadership team and all of her team and the health system team. And there's a goal in every area. And last year, 18 of our 29 departments chose as their goal the development of a robust mentoring program by the end of, this was in the fall of 2021, by the end of June 2022. And which was, we're thrilled. And what we asked the departments then to do is don't do this on your own and come up with a plan and hand it to us. Engage in this program that starts with an introductory meeting and then 4 learning community meetings where we walk through this process of having people identify the problem in their department. So some departments may have a really good, some aspects of mentoring, but not a global program. What's the problem in your department? What's the needs assessment, talking to your faculty? What are the goals and objectives that are going to address those? What's your strategy going to be then for putting it in place? How are you going to implement it? And then how are you going to do the feedback and go through this cycle? And it was just absolutely fantastic. And this is, I give Troy all the credit for this because he ran these learning communities. These are some of the elements of the programs that people identified as the needs. You know, who's going to lead this? We don't have a mentoring lead, so who's going to lead our program? What's going to be the outcome of it? What are the recognition and rewards we may give to mentoring dyads or to mentoring teams? But these were many of the aspects that folks came up with. And then what's the evaluation around this, and how are we making sure that those departments and those faculty members in general are really moving up? This is Kirkpatrick's level of training. So the training around this, how do we move from the early level of reaction to training that's about, did I get a lot out of this session, to the very highest level of the goal of our training, which was vitality and retention and advancement. So it's been a great journey for the departments, and it's really brought, now they're continuing to meet as a learning community quarterly to talk about what they've accomplished, to talk about how it's going, to talk about their implementation, to talk about their evaluation. They virtually all adopted the tools of a mentoring agreement and an evaluation form. So now we've really got programs across our school that many, many departments are engaged in and are really doing some great work. So I'll turn you back to this book as one we really appreciated and helped us with that formation of learning communities. And I'll wind down my talking and turn the floor over to you. So thanks for your attention. That was really great to talk to you. Yeah. So I would say in our training, one of the ways, while we didn't end up having to navigate it too much in that, although a little, the way we talked, very explicitly talking about the fact that there are going to be challenges. And in fact, one of the very early sessions, we have this it's an 8-month program. We meet about once a month. In the second or third session, we talked about problems in the mentoring relationship. And we gave them some practice with the getting to yes criteria. So we didn't just say, these are things we can talk about. We talked about interest, not positions. We talked about win-wins. We talked about how you put the problem on one side of the table and you and your mentee sit on the other side and look at the problem together. So we really gave them some mini training, largely in the getting to yes principles, but introduce that really early with the concept that this may not go well, and that happens. And how do you address it early, communicate, get help, and decide that you may want to move on with in fact, we normalize in that year ending mentoring relationships. We say this relationship may only be this year, or you may have some that are 5 years, but it is normal to have some transitions. You may have some career long, but that's not normal. It's normal to have things end. So we just spoke very explicitly and had people accept the fact that if there's a problem, it's not because I or my mentor are a failure. It's because sometimes it doesn't work. And here's the way to move through that and preserve the relationship, which of course is what it's all about. Sure. That's a, yep, yeah, great question. So we didn't, often it was the chair and someone else. Or if the department had a faculty affairs lead or a faculty development lead, it was that person. We have many, many chairs who attended. We also had people who led their department P&T committee. So it was a mix of folks, but it was clearly it was the chair's goal, and the chair had gotten someone to attend. And these folks were really engaged. I mean, they did a great, great job, but it was a mix of people. But it was always a faculty member. Yes. Yeah. So I touched on that just with a few words, but that's a great point to bring up. Remember, I said mentoring is not directive, and I said the supervisor is director. And what I didn't go on to say is that's the reason the supervisor shouldn't be the mentor. It should not be. It's not always practical, and sometimes the supervisor at least has to play some mentoring role. But it would really be great for that supervisor to say, "Who else is your mentor?" So because there's a conflict of interest between the supervisor also being the mentor. Mhm. Oh, that is excellence in education. So it absolutely shows up on our CV. We have in their personal statement, we ask them to speak to it when they're mentoring trainees. It's about in your publications, highlight who your mentees are, whether they're students or junior faculty, but it's excellence in education and absolutely rewarded in promotion. So, thank you all so much.